I have not met a gypsy yet who did not tell me this story, which goes as follows, because we eventually get down to the stealing, and the gypsy will look at you and say, well, we steal. All right, we steal with our hands, you Americans steal with your pencils. Not a bad line. But they'll say, we have the right to steal. God gave us the right to steal. It's in the Bible. And I would say,
where?
The first time this happened, I said, well, where is it? What's the story? And the story is that when Christ was about to be crucified, there were 4 nails intended for his body, and a gypsy stole the 4th nail, which was to go into his heart. And on the cross, Christ dying, that gave in thanks for this gypsy stealing the 4th nail, said the gypsies proclaimed the gypsies could go on stealing forever.
Peter Maas is the author responsible for such literary successes as the Valachi Papers and Serpico, both of which became major films. His most recent book, King of the Gypsies, is also scheduled for filming under the direction of Peter Bogdanovich. In order to collect material for his books, Peter Maas has met with the mafia and with police involved in graft and corruption. But in gathering information for King of the Gypsies, Peter Maas has been threatened with his life. I'm Eleanor Stout, and this is Pantechnicon, your weekly magazine on entertainment and the arts, brought to you in part through a grant from the Colonnade Hotel of Boston. The subject of Peter Maas' new book involves a group of people so mysterious that even the Census Bureau has no idea how many gypsies live in the United States. They no longer live in horse-drawn caravans on dusty roads. They live in cities, use credit cards, yet they neither read nor write, don't pay taxes, and function in tribes. We talked recently with Peter Maas about these fascinating people and his new book, King of the Gypsies. Peter, from the Valachi Papers to King of the Gypsies, how did you happen to make that transition?
Well, I had Serpico in between.
That's true, you did. I forgot about that. Yeah. How could I forget about that?
Well, I don't know. It's all 3 books have a protagonist who's in a lot of trouble with his own particular world, I suppose. There is a connection there. Joe Valachi was caught between law enforcement and the mafia, and he was slowly being crushed by both of them. And Serpico, of course, was, in terms of other policemen, was a renegade cop because he simply, as he said to me once, took an oath to enforce the law, and it didn't say against everybody except other cops. And he almost lost his life because of that.
Isn't he hiding out in Switzerland?
Well, he's not really hiding out. He's not in Switzerland now. He's in, at the time of the book and then the movie, he was in Switzerland. He's now living in Holland. Really what he was doing was he wanted to get away from this country. Especially New York, it had been too tough and too traumatic an experience for him. And there was a degree of danger to his life still. I don't think there is that much now. Of course, it's easy for me to say that because I'm not the target.
Has there been any danger to your life because of the type of investigative writing you've been doing for your books?
No, not really. The most trouble I've had is with the King of the Gypsies. Yeah.
King of the Gypsies, why?
Well, they're a much more undisciplined group. First of all, the Gypsies, and second of all, it was really a case of culture shock when I got involved with them. You take the mafia with the Valachi Papers. It's, they're really pretty rational people, and if something that had happened to me would only help book sales, it would have only made the movie version more profitable. It certainly wouldn't have deterred some other writer from doing a story 5 years later if he found one as good as Valachi was. And it would have caused the mob and organized crime in general a lot more trouble. And they basically wouldn't have gained anything out of it. And in the case of Serpico, most of what I wrote factually about Serpico had already appeared in the newspapers. And incidentally, that's one of the reasons I started to write books. I was an investigative reporter for newspapers and magazines. I was concentrating on the what, limited what happened, the facts of the thing.
As a reporter?
As a reporter. And, when you start out as an investigative reporter, you think you're going to change the world, and it turns out that you really don't.
That you don't really.
The faces change. I got much more interested in the how and the why of the situation. To me, the drama of Serpico and the reason book was a success, and the reason I was interested in it was not the corruption that Serpico uncovered, but the ordeal he had to go through to get somebody to do something about it.
But then how did you go from Serpico to King of the Gypsies?
Well,
What drew you to that?
I was just because of those two books particularly, I get an awful lot of calls from people, friends, and total strangers, and they're all telling me about this great story or this great project
Got a lead
that I
for
should
you,
get
Peter.
involved in. Right, there are a whole bunch of people who just, and then people I don't even know. I get 8 or 10 a week, and they never pan out. I was just beginning to work on a novel when I met a friend in a restaurant. It was with somebody else who got up, and somebody I'd never met, and he told me how much he admired all my work and so on and so forth. And about a week later, he called me, and he said there's this fascinating story that a friend of his had told him about a death struggle in the gypsy subculture in the United States. Well, I didn't know very much about gypsies, and I don't think most Americans think they're certainly not on the consciousness of, an American doesn't wake up in the morning and think about gypsies.
We have this romantic image of caravans and golden bracelets.
Well, in any event, I had a free afternoon. This fellow was very persistent, and I did meet one of the gypsies that are in my book, and he told me these incredibly wild stories, none of which I believed at all. They were just...
You didn't believe them at all?
No, I thought, But what happened was a week later, the gypsy himself called me and asked my help in a particular matter. His sister was in a hospital. She had tried to commit suicide because her father had sold her into marriage, and she had run away from this marriage, and the father refused to let her break away from this marriage he'd arranged, and she tried to commit suicide. Well, that's pretty wild in 1975 in America, and so I went along with it. I went to the hospital with him, and by God, there she was, and we did get her out. And so I thought, well, that story turned out to be true. I better take a look at some others.
Did you find, Peter, that when you were collecting information about the gypsy culture in the United States, that you were constantly paralleling the whole culture with the mafia structure? Is it very similar in many ways?
Well, to a degree, in that there are gypsy tribes instead of mafia crime families, and each one has a leader. And blood relationships have a great deal to do with keeping them together, and also their organization, such as it is to, as in the mafia and the same in the gypsy world, is what our organization they have is to keep them from tearing each other apart. I didn't quite finish your question in the beginning about being in danger, and that's one of the things that I find so annoying with the gypsies. The organization it falls apart as far as they have threatened me. They have
the gypsies have
all kinds of harassment from them. They found out my telephone number in New York, and I get calls, like 2 o'clock in the morning saying, we know what you look like. We saw you on television. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But basically, I think it's just harassment. I really do. I think they're the people calling are far more angry at my protagonist in the book, and also gypsies who I finally got to talk to me.
You were very fortunate to be able to get to talk to many of these gypsies, because I understand they are very private people. And how were you ever able to get this information?
Well, there is a bit of a chink in the gypsy subculture now. For almost 2,000 years, they have lived and acted exactly the same. However, my wedge into it, into the story of the book, was that there is a death struggle going on, even as we speak. That's a great phrase. Between father and his son for control of the most powerful of the gypsy tribes in America, the most aggressive and the most violent of the gypsy tribes. They are literally trying to kill each other. The father here in Boston, for instance, tried to have the boy blinded. He's tried to have him murdered in New York. He came very close to framing him on a series of trumped-up charges that would have sent him the boy to prison for 25 years, effectively removing him from the scene. The boy, in turn, has tried to kill the father with a .38 pistol.
So there are gypsy tribes all over the United States,
There are
including
about
Boston.
60, yes. And that's now aside from the sheer drama of what I've just talked about, which is irresistible for a writer to have this kind of thing going on in modern America is incredible. The other thing was that I suddenly found out that gypsies officially don't exist in the United States, and there may be 1 million or more of them. And I thought, wow, here we are, the most computerized society the world has ever seen. Invasion of privacy is one of the great issues of the day, and here you have 1 million people wandering around, uncounted.
Nobody pays any attention to them.
Yeah, and they make sure they not only here but throughout their history have operated shielded by a one-way mirror through which they do all the looking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got very involved in that. And besides my describing this death fight between the father and the son, the gypsy establishment, you see, the other thing is that the boy represents a change in the attitude of some of the younger gypsies who want to break away from the traditional gypsy life, on what are a relatively mild level, too, I must say, such as sending children to school. Not only the gypsies operate beautifully in the United States, almost invisibly, to a large extent ripping us off. Swindles is the cottage industry of the gypsy
No fortune-telling
culture.
parlors?
Well, that's a
one of
key
the
part of
swindles.
it. Now, the gypsy establishment, the elders, do not want their children, for instance, to go to school. I thought that was a mild revolutionary step to ask the boy and some other younger gypsies. But that's the way the older gypsies, the gypsy establishment maintains control generation after generation. If the children don't go to school, don't know how to read and write, they have no choice to do anything except to follow in the ancient traditions of the gypsy culture. The other thing that has all the gypsies furious at me is that I have in the book, I write about almost every kind of con game and swindle that they indulge in.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are terrific.
You
And,
were really kind of surprised.
And
at some
they
of
are very active. One of them is through the fortune-telling parlors, which the gypsies called offices. And well, at the same time,
Why is
they're
it a swindle,
invisible. They're invisible. Just in New York, the only place the gypsies really exist in any bureaucratic form is in police department files. And the New York Police Department, for instance, takes an annual survey of these fortune-telling parlors. And the current survey is going on now, and it's about half through, and they've got 500 so far. So they're there,
Peter, what in your mind is a gypsy?
Well, a gypsy, and ethnically, a gypsy, it is an ethnic, it is a race. Gypsies originally, the gypsies would like to promulgate the idea, kind of the carefree, happy-go-lucky Hungarian fiddler, sawing away madly and gay and so on. Gypsies are from northern India, as best we can determine, and they left there sometime in the last, about 1700 years ago. Why, nobody knows, and they moved across the Middle East. When they got to the Dardanelles, they parted. Some went along North Africa and then crossed into Spain. The rest moved through Central Europe, the Balkans, and so on. Some settled, made smaller nomadic circles, and the rest kept going till they got to Paris about 1425. Then they curled back through Northern Europe into Russia, and eventually throughout the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And everywhere they've gone, they've had the same falling domino effect. At first, they've been greeted with fascination, and then a lot of second thoughts, mostly bad ones.
Are they still nomadic in this country? Do they
Yes.
travel around a great deal?
Yes, they don't travel in groups. That's one of the reasons we're not so conscious of them now. In Europe, they still travel in caravans, but in the United States they travel in individual family units, and they're always on the move. Obviously, there are exceptions, but predominantly they're always on the move.
You talked about tribes. Do these tribes have different names?
Mm-hmm. But there are two basic tribes, the Muchwaya and the Kalderash. There are four basic gypsy tribes, but the only two of them here in the United States. And then within that, there are subdivided into other tribes or clans. One of the clan that I am particularly writing about is the Bimbo tribe. There are a number here in the Boston area. They're all over the United States, as a matter of fact. They're the most feared of the tribes. I was doing a television show in New York last week, and a news show, and we took photographs, film of a lot of gypsy fortune-telling parlors, and in one, a little boy ran out, and before they could grab him and drag him back in, the interviewer thrust the microphone in his face and said, well, what about the bimbos? And he said, they're killers. And then he realized that he said something wrong, and he said, oh, no, they're just like the rest of us. It was kind of funny now he made it even worse, you know.
Do these tribes ever get together in sort of a national cultural celebration, or they're just too busy fighting with each other?
Not so much anymore. There was a gathering that I wrote about in the book that took place in Methuen, Massachusetts. You know where Methuen is?
Yeah.
Methuen is between Lowell and Lawrence, as I found out. And it was a massive riot. It took place in 1928, I think. Had the town of Methuen on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Over 200 cops had to be called. The National Guard was almost brought out. And that riot was triggered by, I've spoken about the boy and his father fighting for control of the Bimbo tribe. And the trouble is all started because the grandfather, who's the most powerful of the gypsy kings in the United States and the most feared, he died in 1969, triggered this particular riot because he moved into the Boston area and he wanted to take over. Most tribal leaders there's no real succession. Most tribal leaders, kings, are either the wisest, the one that people go to for help and advice and counsel. But King Teni Bimbo grabbed for power, and he worked along American underworld lines. For instance, all the fortune-telling establishments in whatever city he was in had to pay him a percentage of the profits each month, and if they didn't, they were in a lot of trouble.
Do they get into any mafia areas at all, whatever the mafia happens to be involved in?
No, not really. They're basically the basic criminal activity of the gypsies are in the confidence games and swindles. Although increasingly there's been a little bit more violence. Violence seems to be on the upswing.
Peter, did you have a chance to go into any of their... Do they live in home? Where do they live? If they're constantly moving, do they just rent apartments for a while and set up con games and then they move on?
That's right. The movers do. As time has gone on, gypsies have bought houses. I know of several houses that they've bought, or they have apartments. But even if they live in a place, they still go off for a while.
You, in talking about the hierarchy, you're always referring to the king and the son. What happens today with gypsy women? What is their role in this whole culture?
Well, the women's liberation does not exist. The ERA does not exist in the gypsy world at all, and it's another contradiction. As a matter of fact, the only contradiction that I could think of about gypsies would be to have no contradictions at all. Now, the men are absolutely dominant. They make all the decisions. The women, however, do all the work. And 95% of the swindles and the confidence games are conducted by the women. And that's the basic income for gypsies, is just that, despite a howl of protest that I can hear from an anthropologist or a sociologist here or there who get hung up on them, you know. But the fact is that that's what they do.
And what about the kids then? Do they get involved in these con games too?
Yes,
Are
they
all
start
part of
very
it?
young. For instance, have you ever walked down the street and there's a beautiful girl or a young boy will say, buy a flower for the American Indian? That's a big thing that's flourishing in New York. Now, I always thought they were Indians or gypsies. They start that way. The kids are trained early to, typical thing is one or two children, beautifully dressed, look, you know, they just look so innocent and so on, will knock on somebody's door. They prefer older people, and they will say they're from the neighborhood parish and they're bringing a vial of holy water to some parishioner, and they'll give a vague description of the parishioner, and but they've lost the address, and could they look it up in the phone book? And one girl will say, will occupy the person, while the other one says she has to go to the bathroom, and she'll go off and she'll run through the house and she'll grab it, and they know exactly where people hide money.
It sounds like it's a fairly a series of small operations, though. It's not a big network.
These are, but I must say, the swindles in the fortune-telling parlors are by no means chicken feed. They involve millions of dollars every year.
Why do you call them swindles, Peter?
Well, because they will get a woman, and the biggest one that I ran across amounted to $118,000, which isn't
That's
bad.
pretty good.
And I ran into dozens averaging $50,000 or $75,000. And the police feel that they just have the tip of the iceberg, that most victims of a gypsy swindle are so embarrassed and humiliated that they just don't report it. What happens is that in the fortune-telling parlors, you go in and you want your fortune told, you want advice. Usually the sign says reader and advisor, and they, 100, 300, 1,000 people could pass through, and they'll give a perfunctory reading for $5 or whatever. They are looking for the one person who is a little bit disturbed, one person who has a problem, a terminally ill parent, a bad marriage, a retarded child, anything that will, where the person is worried. The most victims are women, but there are a lot of men too, I must say. And as soon as they find out that the person has a particular problem, they go to work on it right away. They say, well, forget about the money. I just want to help you. I like you so much. There's something wrong. Something is causing all of this, whatever the bad thing is, to happen, something, and we've got to find out what it is. And they go to work on a series of marvelous and very impressive tricks, basically sleight of hand, that just the control that they can exert over a victim. And they do it very slowly. It'll take 2 or 3 weeks for them to do it. They may say, well, there's something wrong, and we've got to find out what it is. We've got to find out if there's a problem and how bad the problem is. And they will tell the victim to take an egg.
They keep milking the customer.
Take an egg and put it in a handkerchief. Put it under your pillow for 2 days and 2 nights and sleep on it and bring the egg back to me. Well, the victim will do it. Actually, people are very
So gullible.
to this kind of thing. But look, ever since The Exorcist, for instance, the film, business has been booming greater than ever for the gypsies, and this whole interest in the devil and so on and so forth. So what happens is the person brings back the egg, maybe as a joke or maybe out of mild curiosity or whatever, and hands it to the gypsy woman, who switches it. And they're terrific. She breaks the egg, and you look down into the yolk, and you will see a little devil's head staring up at you, and it is frightening.
I'll bet.
I've seen it.
You've seen it.
And it's unnerving. Or a pinch of hair, which is an awesome sight in that yellow of the egg.
In the yolk.
She screams. She's the gypsy woman. My God, this is really, pretty bad.
And so how the
Then
Exorcist...
she might say, I don't know if I can help you. This is terrible. I mean, this is really, and I don't want any money. I just want to do it for you. And then perhaps I'm short-circuiting a number of things they do, but the next major step will be to find out if the gypsy woman can be of any help to the victim. And she will then take a dollar bill and tear it in half, wrap it again in a handkerchief, and pin it to, if the victim is a woman, to her bra, and say, don't take this off, wear it for 24 hours, and bring it back. Person brings it back, she takes it out, there's another switch, she takes out and the dollar bill is miraculously in one piece, thereby indicating that the gypsy woman has some influence in this
Some
whole
magical
problem.
power.
And they will go on, and each trick they will do becomes more impressive, and And in the end, we come down to the nitty-gritty, and it's always the same. And just in the city of Chicago alone, there were over 300 of these cases last year. And remember, the police don't believe that they get anywhere near an accurate estimate of the number that take place every year.
And
The final thing is that what's caused the victim all his or her problems is cursed money.
Cursed money.
Cursed money, either money that if she's a widow, that her husband, somebody put a curse on him and it went to the money, but it's cursed money, and they are going to remove the curse. In fact, what they do is remove the money.
Of course.
Because sooner or later, you're going to have to come with and bring the money to them for a final exorcism.
How do the gypsies feel, though, about their own culture? Are they trying to, when you think about the traditional image of gypsies, do they try and maintain their culture at all through music or dancing, or they're just too busy with their con games to bother with anything like that?
The only real music that the gypsies are involved in, made a major contribution, are Spanish gypsies and flamenco. The rest of it is no better or worse than anybody else's, but they like to promote the image that they, but the kind of cultural entity that they like to maintain are excuses, rationales for just the kind of thing that I've told you. And I have not met a gypsy yet who did not tell me this story, which goes as follows, because we eventually get down to the stealing, and the gypsy will look at you and say, well, we steal. All right, we steal with our hands. You Americans steal with your pencils. Not a bad line.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll say, we have the right to steal. God gave us the right to steal. It's in the Bible. And I would say,
where?
The first time this happened, I said, well, where is it? What's the story? And the story is that when Christ was about to be crucified, there were 4 nails intended for his body, and a gypsy stole the 4th nail, which was to go into his heart. And on the cross, Christ dying, gave in thanks for this gypsy stealing the 4th nail, said the gypsies, proclaimed the gypsies could go on stealing forever. So I said to the first gypsy who told me this story, I said, well, that's not in the Bible. You're crazy. And gypsies will never give up. You can never get them in a corner. He looked at me and he said, well, what Bible did you read? Who wrote it?
You wrote it. That's wonderful. Did you meet a lot of gypsies that you really enjoyed? You must have found them fascinating.
Well, I have love-hate relationships with them. They are very difficult people. They are very difficult people, and the few people who've had long relationships with them are basically in Europe. The few in America the gypsies use. Serious anthropologists, sociologists come around and spend time with them, learn to speak their language, and this, that, and the other thing. The gypsies encourage this because this helps perpetuate this image of them being kind of harmless, good-natured folk.
How did you know when to stop in relation to your book?
I didn't, because it just goes on and on. The struggle between the father and the son still goes on, and I just that part of it is open. They are still looking for each other.
They're still fighting.
And but it gave me a chance to explore, as I say, all the swindles, as well as marvelous insights into their life, how their taboos, their superstitions, and the idea. If I had come over a mountaintop in New Guinea, say like Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, wouldn't I find a Stone Age tribe living exactly the same way as it did 2,000 years ago? That'd be one thing, totally isolated and remote. But these people, the gypsies, do the same thing, and they rub shoulders with us every day in every big city we have.
And we don't even know it.
And I wanted to explore all of that in the book.
Mm-hmm. This is going to be made into a film, I understand.
Yes, it is.
Peter Bogdanovich is
maybe
directing?
Bogdanovich. He has another picture to do before he does this one, and that's been delayed, and I don't know. I have a funny feeling it may be another director.
You're getting to be you are quite a celebrity. All of these marvelous books and then being turned into films? It's just amazing.
Well, those are just that happens by accident. I must. Somebody said to me once, "How marvelous you pick
Gypsy
all these stories." When I wrote the Valachi papers, I couldn't even get a publisher. There were 38 publishers turned that down. They all told me the Mafia wouldn't
really,
sell. I thought I was writing a definitive history on the Mafia. It turned out I was creating a new industry.
There you are.
And we had great trouble having that made into a film. I must say it was one of the worst films I ever saw.
You didn't like it at all.
No, Serpico I like much better. I had a lot more to do with Serpico. I obviously cared much more about Serpico than I did about Valachi as a person. And
How much do you care about the King of the Gypsies?
well, I don't have an emotional, but I have a cultural fascination, and I want it certainly is going to be the first movie ever made about gypsies that's going to be different from all those others starring Rita Hayworth and Cornel Wilde and Jane Russell and what have you.
No more of this romantic image.
No, we're going to stop with
And in the
that. I
meantime,
think it's going to reflect the book.
We can enjoy the book. Thank you very much, Peter Maas. Thank you for being with us tonight. We've been talking with Peter Maas, author of King of the Gypsies. Our engineer for this broadcast was Chris Eaton, with material prepared by Beth Park. For Pantechnicon, this is Eleanor Stout, and have a good evening. This is the Eastern Public Radio Network.